financial institutions to actually enter the market. We have been providing support to the counties within northern Kenya so that they can improve the enabling environment so that they're increasing private sector activity within the region. And then we're also providing capacity building to the lenders, helping them understand what products and services they need to be able to support the clients in that area. A lot of that work is around Sharia compliance loans because the majority of the population in northern Kenya is Muslim, but there's also a lot of work around financial products for agricultural services, financial products for women who lack collateral and the like. Next slide, please. So we talk about the supply side progression. This Impact for Northern Kenya Fund is a part of the USAID Kuza project. It's a very simple model, but it was very innovative as far as USAID was concerned because it's the first time USAID Kenya has actually had a sustainable fund where we are investing money that will continue to be used even after the project ends. So USAID, through the project, put aside a bucket of $14 million. That $14 million was used to establish the Impact for Northern Kenya Fund. It is a separate legal entity, fully sustainable, and will continue, as I mentioned, continue operating even after the project ends. The fund makes loans to financial institutions. Those financial institutions make loans to micro, small, and medium enterprises. The MSMEs repay the financial institutions repay the fund, and it keeps operating. But we are, most importantly, an impact fund. So all of our investments are screened for social and environmental impact, and we're also measuring social and environmental impact after the fact. So we are looking for economic opportunities for vulnerable populations. We are looking for job creation. We're looking for gender and youth equality and a positive impact on the environment. If we can please just go back to the previous slide. We have seen about $97 million being leveraged out of this $14 million that originally came into the project. We're seeing about 15,000 jobs created. Of our loans, 52% of the value of the loans go to women, only about 9% to youth, but we have found that the youth in northern Kenya are more interested in jobs than they are in starting small enterprises. And about 20% of those 15,000 jobs have gone to youth, and about 2.3 million in climate financing. Next slide, please. So this is an example of the leveraging of our previous work. Agricultural Finance Corporation, AFC, is a parastatal that does agricultural financing throughout Kenya. In the previous project, LMS, they supported the bank to actually build a branch in Marsabit, one of the counties in northern Kenya, and they helped them to develop a Sharia-compliant loan policy so that they're able to finance the Muslim population in northern Kenya. Our project, USAID Kuza, then came in and was able to lend them $1.25 million. We lend them $1.25 million, and they've used that to finance 60 clients, including a number of SACCOs. SACCOs are savings and loan cooperatives. So the AFC is then becoming a wholesale financer, and they're lending money to these SACCOs as well. 90% of the money that we have lent to them is reaching smallholder farmers, and there's an average loan size of about $11,000. Next slide, please. I think we're stuck. The next example I wanted to talk about was one of our microfinance institutions. The fund has lent money to 7 financial institutions. 3 of them are microfinance institutions. And so one of them is called Faveli Micro Enterprises. Faveli, we lent them $3.25 million. They use a Grameen model of group lending as opposed to asking for collateral. And as such, 81% of their clients are women because women in northern Kenya generally do not have access to collateral. One of the clients that I wanted to highlight, because to me it sinks in a little bit better when you can see the people that the money is actually going to. So they provided a loan to a woman named Charity Gate. She is a vegetable seller. In Kenya, we call them mama bogas, mother of vegetables. And Madame Gatte became a vegetable seller because her family was impacted by the drought. They were pastoralists for the most part, and so she wanted to be able to diversify their income. So she got this loan from Favelli. She actually had to go through a number of financial literacy trainings and then join a group of 5 other Mama Bogas, and she received a loan of about $160. She used that capital to buy vegetables wholesale and then to also pay her market fees and transport costs. From this $160, she is then able to qualify for 4 additional loans. So she has received total loans of about $700. On average, she earns about $8 a day. In an area, $8 a day doesn't sound like a ton of money, but this is an area where the majority of the population, almost 70% of the population, lives on less than $2.15 a day. Additionally, she's also hiring 2 people. She hires 1 person to help her in the market, and then she also hires a transporter to bring the goods from farm to market. And finally, she's been able to also establish a credit history with a financial institution and then be able to also get a follow-on loan for her children's tuition. Favelli has sponsored 5,000 of such Mama Bogas throughout northern Kenya. Thank you.
Right, so good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kelvin Shikuku. I work with the International Livestock Research Institute as an economist, and I'll be presenting evidence on, some of the efforts that we've been, making to create or ensure financial inclusion for women, in northern Kenya. This is collaborative work with University of California, Davis, so Professor Michael Carter, but also with the BOMA project. And in that regard, I would like to acknowledge the presence of Sam Willie, the CEO of BOMA, and also with private sector, in this case, the Takaful Insurance of Africa. Next slide, please. So societies tend to, because it's important we have context here, so societies tend to construct gender along multiple dimensions, right? And I think 3 dimensions particularly stand out when we think about insurance. One is the type of expenditure responsibilities that people have, and also then, the role of risk exposure, in those expenditures. So for example, women, food security is something that, is close to their heart. They also want to see their families healthy, etc. But when risk happens, these are things that are really, put them in very vulnerable and difficult situation. But you can also think about domains of economic activity, right? And in this case, again, in pastoral setups, for example, we are talking about livestock, and their indexability for insurance. So for example, here we are talking about a context where, normalized difference vegetation index or forage availability used as a way of, indexing the, the assets that they have, but the asset is something that is perceived to be a man's activity, right? Often livestock is not something that, in this context, people think of as a man activity. And so you can, again, look at the, domains of economic activity and whether this can be indexed for insurance. And then lastly is also networks through which information is shared and learning occurs, right? So again, in pastoral setups particularly, it's common for people to form groups, with the objective of sharing risks, but through those groups, there's also a lot of, learning and information exchange. And we are particularly seeing that these groups tend to be organized, for men and for women separately. And so what we are saying here is that if you took a gender-blind approach, that might really not work in addressing climatic shocks, but also in creating financial inclusion. And so we need to be more intentional in terms of efforts that combine, asset building with those that somehow aim to protect asset in pastoral setups. Next, please. And so I talked about the BOMA project. Let me just give a very brief background here. So BOMA project implemented what was called the Rural Entrepreneur Access Program. This program aimed at, creating savings groups of, with women, and then, providing sort of a mentorship program over a period of about 18 months, during which they acquired important business skills, but also life skills. Women received some startup capital so that they could invest in a business of their choice. And so the intention again here was to really help them build both material assets, but also intangible psychological assets. So an evaluation was then carried out, and it showed significant improvement in some important outcomes here. So women productive assets grew up, for example, 320%. There was a tremendous increase in family cash income, but also in savings. So of course, some of these numbers are large because we are, the reference point was quite low, but still, very impressive gains over there. So the question that you might then be asking is that, can these gains be sustained, or can they survive the next shock? And typically, really, what happens is that when a shock comes, even though women have accumulated assets, they tend to be depleted quite quickly, right? Even the savings that had been accumulated can easily be eroded. And that can, make people not just poor, but can also keep them in that situation for a long time. So how can we then, there's a strong case, therefore, to combine asset building and asset protection, but is there a role that livestock insurance could play in this pastoralist setup? And so the first level problem, again, here is that the economic activity that can be directly indexed, in this case, forage availability on open rangeland, is tied to an activity that is construed as a male activity, right? In this case, again, livestock keeping. So are rangelands therefore relevant to women responsibilities, and can it be salient to, can it be made more salient to them? Next, please. So we started by just seeing how we can create demand, right? So thinking about women, we started by looking into ways in which we can frame insurance to speak to the direct needs of women. So Pastoralist is an app that was developed at the time by a PhD student of Michael Carter at the University of California, Davis, aimed at understanding, stimulating demand, but also understanding whether there was willingness to purchase. So this game was played with couples across about 30 communities. We framed insurance both in terms of family units of insurance, and as well as the conventional livestock units of insurance. And as predicted, women were more interested in insurance that was framed as, in terms of family units. So uptake rates, as you can see in the graph here, was quite high, for family units of insurance as compared to livestock units. So the question again is, if you took this in a real world setup, would we see the same effects? Next, please. And so we implemented an experiment where we now took those learnings to the field in one of the counties in Kenya, Samburu County, implemented an experiment together with Takaful Insurance, where we placed some people, randomly into a group that received the family framing of insurance, and another one livestock framing of insurance. And so, because the family insurance was a new concept, we had to calibrate the payment levels based on the Kenya Emergency Cash Transfer Program, in this case, the Hunger Safe Net program. So what, next slide, please. So what we observed again in that was that there was quite high-tech, next please, high-tech up rates, again for family insurance compared to livestock insurance. This just tells you how we implemented it. I think I already explained that, including how the BOMA mentors were trained and the willingness by the private sector to sell insurance in family units. So, but what is interesting is perhaps the last bullet here, which shows that take-up rates increased by, 20% for the family unit of insurance relative to the tropical livestock units framing. And there was also a 40% increase in the amounts of monies that people actually were willing to invest in insurance. Next, please. So interesting here very quickly is that this experiment was implemented in a setup where subsidies are common. But what we see is that, even after the subsidy period was over, you can see that the uptake rates for family insurance was actually significantly higher. So which means that those effects were sustained beyond the subsidy phase. And so a key lesson here again is that when insurance speaks to the needs of women and provides a chance to experiment, impacts can really be large. Next, please. Okay, so we've seen significant progress so far. Okay, so the question is, what else can be done to really make sure that insurance is fully available for women? So we came up with this concept of VISA, which is basically a village insurance saving association model. The idea here is to, again, leverage some of the structures that BOMA already created. So we work with those groups. They already know how to save. They already know how to hold each other accountable in case there's default. The only thing we are doing here is to encourage them to create a savings account where they can now start accumulating small savings. And when insurance is available for purchase, they not only know about it, but they also have the financial capability to buy it. Next, please. Next, I think this I already explained, so maybe you can just go to the next one. Yeah, so this basically shows you where we are implementing the experiments. So we are working in 5 counties in northern Kenya, testing again in the control group. We are somehow testing the conventional livestock unit framing. And we only provide training on the conventional training on livestock insurance. In the treatment, we are gender intentional, so we introduce the idea of family framing, but we also then bring this VISA model that I mentioned. Next, please, as I conclude. Okay. Yeah, I mean, the next slide just shows you where those groups are placed. And so it's again showing where we are working. So maybe we'll go to the next one as I conclude. Yeah. So this is my last slide. So what we see here is that while in the arid and semi-arid lands, they are not certainly low-hanging fruits in terms of making livestock insurance fully available for women, but they are a place where we could really make a difference in terms of durably, empowering women. The experiment here, suggests that our gender intentional approach works, but we are keen to see how much, what more can be achieved by employing the VISA model. And our approach also allows us to look over a longer period of time, the effect of, our intervention on women empowerment, etc. So I'll pause there. Thank you.
We'll bring Paswell back online.
Hi, Sophie. Yes, I'm here. So I'm trying to share my screen, if that's okay.
Can we do that?
Is that okay? I'm sharing my screen.
Yeah, we have slides up for you, Paswell. Did you make substantive changes that you need your own slides?
No.
Okay, well then, yeah, we're seeing your slides. Can you see them?
Yes, I'm sharing from here. Should I stop sharing and?
That's fine. Okay, we can go. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Paswell Marenya. I am an economist with the International Maize and Wheat Improvement Center, CIMMYT. I'm going to talk to you about a project we implemented about 5 years ago now, 6, with the UC David MRR team that you're seeing there. And it talks about the work that CIMMYT, as part of the CGIAR system, has done in the last 20 years in developing stress-tolerant, in this case, drought-tolerant maize varieties that act as some sort of genetic insurance, but bundle that with an index insurance. And we think this project speaks to the financial inclusion notion that we have here today, in the sense that I will explain as I go on. If my slides can move, I thought I was solving the, okay, there we go. So I don't need to preach to this audience that risk makes and keeps households poor. This is all known. There are technologies that are available to farmers, including small-scale farmers, that could improve their productivity but are risky. So in a bad state of the world, the otherwise productive technology can really be risky because you have to spend resources on it, such as new but more expensive but more productive seeds, fertilizer, and the like. So that's not something to dwell on. We all know that the risk makes households who don't have much to hold back from investing in better and riskier technologies. So then we need to do something about it. And that's what we did by testing this notion of bundling drought-tolerant maize with a rainfall index insurance. And so graphically or conceptually, that's what you see here. The horizontal dotted white line up there is a control group that did not have access to DT maize or the index insurance. And during the period of the project, we detected what you see there. So the dotted line is a baseline, and then the red line is what you see when there was droughts during the project implementation, what happened there, and the subsequent experimental evidence that we found that their yields suffered, but never quite recovered even 2 to 3 seasons later. So therefore, the question is, can these bundles of complementary genetic and financial technologies unlock investment and productivity for smallholder farmers? We will see some evidence to that. So the study, therefore, is an attempt to see how impactful that novel two technology combination would be. Drought-tolerant maize has proven to be quite useful with superiority even in drought events of up to 25%. And then we put that with index insurance, and the study employs a multi-year, spatially diversified research design, Tanzania and Mozambique. This is quite innovative because most studies don't have that. We don't have that combination. So we do find that combination is superior. When households do see the benefits of these technologies, they actually respond positively by even intensifying their input use. But results not shown in this presentation also show that if you do not observe the benefits of these technologies, households kind of retreat. They step back to the baseline, and they ignore these either insurance or sometimes even new seeds. There's a lot of discussion why new superior seeds don't catch on really as much as we expect them to. Simply because if you're talking about stochastic benefits, such as drought-tolerant maize, that shows its true benefits only when drought occurs 20% of the time, so 1 in 5 years, or index insurance. If people don't see that quickly, they kind of retreat. Those are the study locations. I've talked about it. This was quite widespread in Tanzania and Mozambique. Those locations you're seeing there, control groups, DT households, DT meaning drought-tolerant maize and index insurance. And so the results, the 2 slides after this that I'm going to show is based on this graphical measure of resilience, which is what you see here, which kind of tries to detect or capture what happens when a shock hits a household. How do they recover? For example, the red line is somebody who suffers a shock, and then somehow there's a bit of resilience going on and they're recovering, but not quite fully. So that's what's being measured down here. And this comes from Michael Carter and Mo Alusha's paper. And in this example, resilience is about 43%, which means they're only recovering up to 43% after a shock over a period of time. The ideal situation is where somebody recovers really quickly, where this shock here is followed by a rapid ascent back to the blue line. That often doesn't happen, and this is what you see in our experiment as well. So the control group from the experimental results that we got during the 4 years that the 4 seasons that the study was active, we see that the control group suffered a yield shock of about half, from 1,500 to about 700. And they didn't quite recover, even 2 seasons later. You would think that if households were able to recapitalize, get new seeds next season, fertilize and whatever, they can get back despite the previous season's drought. But that doesn't happen. Part of it is decapitalization, households suffer, yields fall like this. This is quite catastrophic. If you're thinking of somebody's potential income being more than halved in a marginal area, so that's quite catastrophic, and it is difficult, I think, reasonably so, to recover from that. However, our experiment also showed the green dotted line, that those who had DT, drought tolerant and index insurance, were able to recover quite quickly, but even proceed beyond their pre-treatment levels, which is what in this study we are calling resilience with, or rather resilience dividend, which is up to 82%. So they recover and even exceed because they are able to see the benefits of index insurance, DT maize, the payouts that happened in terms of seed during the previous seasons, and that encourages further replanting and what have you. So a powerful proof of concept indeed. With the following take-home messages, you could see, though I'm rushing through this, you could see that the control group actually were really not resilient. I think you saw in one of the graphs where even without, their level of production was not that flat. It was trending downwards, you know, all things considered. Shocks can reduce income by 25 to 50% and spill into future seasons with very slow recovery. And that's very dangerous for households in these marginal places. But however, if we have these technologies, if we can find a way of institutionalizing them, we think that these risk management technologies can more than enable households to bounce back, intensify investments in seeds and fertilizers. And therefore, the proof of concept can actually be realized in reality. What does this got to do with financial inclusion? The following. The idea of combining genetic solutions with financial ones, the way we've done genetic insurance and financial insurance, is to say that kind of lowers the cost of accessing the insurance. It makes it easier for insurance companies to participate in that market, for farmers to do the same. And that's a good way to look at it. In terms of implementation, it does give implementing institutions what you could call economies of implementation scope, because 2 products can be implemented in 1 program, 2 or even 3. You could even think of a savings program being embedded into this as well. So this notion of bringing a multiple bundled product like this offers a great deal of chance for financial inclusion, we think. There's more details in the paper. I think Sophie is in the room. Please reach out to Sophie. She will direct you to the Knowledge Management Center of MRR, and you'll be able to enjoy this paper. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Paswell. That concludes the 4 very diverse presentations and case studies. Although I do have to say that having listened to all 4 kind of in a row, what strikes me is the real messaging around the need for kind of comprehensive and holistic, but thoughtful, complementary interventions. So all four of these kind of strike me as examples of kind of a collaborative with public-private partnerships, but also across interventions, a collaborative way of working to build resilience. So I'm hoping that we also have some questions that we can follow up on. We do have, what, about 5 minutes? And we have some runners for microphones. So if anyone has any additional questions that they'd like to ask our four panelists, that would be very welcome. John Mayer? Sorry.
Is this on? Yep. Yes, it is. Thanks, everyone. I have a question for Winey. So just on the logic of all this, I think we believe with evidence that financial inclusion is a source of resilience for households and communities. And in your example, you showed us some really good and successful strategies for ensuring financial inclusion for households and communities. Is there an additional step, though, to then prove that those households and communities were more resilient because of what your program achieved? It's not stated directly like I just did.
Yes, I think that there is still more work to be done. The fund started in our first loan happened in 2021. So we just have about 2 years under our belt. So we are continuing to measure the impacts longer term. The good news is, in the example I gave you of the microfinance institution, we are taking credit only for her first loan of $160, but she went on to receive multiple loans totaling over $700, and she will continue to be a client of this financial institution, so we can continue to track her to track her performance in terms of her business, but also in terms of her household, because I mentioned she's now qualifies for additional loans for tuition and the like. So there is much more work to be done, but we are very much at the infancy stage of the fund.
Thank you. Please.
Yeah, thank you. I'm George Campbell. I needed clarity, especially on the KUSA project and overall to any of the presenters. I saw that you talk so much of the potential impact, but I also needed clarity to say, is there a means to verify convergence of intervention in the identified areas of implementation? And to what extent would you say it is this program that has brought such an impact and not this one? And what are the measures and systems in place in your respective countries to ensure that there is no multiple beneficiary of the same household? Because when you look at the vulnerability attributes are almost the same, and the different intervention uses the same characteristics in identifying and supporting mostly the same households. And even government also is also in a number of countries found to be also coming to the same households and providing support. What are the measures within your programs to ensure that there's the exclusion of these from other interventions, so for it to result in the presentation you made? Thank you.
I try not to exclude other projects. I think that, especially in USAID Kenya, we're not even allowed to use our project name. We're supposed to say it's a USAID intervention. And we are, like I mentioned, building upon other projects. So when I give the example of the change in the percentage of people with access to financial institutions, I don't think that's just a USAID initiative. The fact that USAID did a lot of work in terms of access to finance has led to this result. As well, the government did a lot of things to stabilize the region so that more financial institutions will enter the market. But then we also have a lot of work from the private sector who actually established cell phone towers in this area. So now people are able to use mobile money. So I think that we are not going to be able to delineate in terms of certain results. We're not going to be able to delineate where exactly those results came from, but we are going to all continue to work together and collaborate to take credit for it.
All the way in the back.
My name is Tilahu Namide. I work for Agra. My question is to my brother Pashwal. You know, when it comes to inputs that are seeds and fertilizers, they are very easy to adopt. They have low cost, usually less risky. But when it comes to knowledge-intensive interventions, resource-based interventions, like land rehabilitation, revegetation, soil health, which are not giving immediate benefits, we struggle to convince farmers to invest on them. So in your model, you know, have you also considered those long-term type of resource-based interventions versus those which are really bringing about immediate impact like fertilizer and seeds? Thank you.
Is there anyone
Yeah, no,
particular
thank you,
you'd like-
Tilahun. Nice to see you.
Yeah, go ahead, Peswal.
Hello? Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Tilahun. Nice to see you there. Yeah, I think you're right. Conceptually, adopting a new maize variety when you're already a maize farmer shouldn't be a big problem. But I've also heard, and you may have heard this also, that it takes about 3 seasons of trying a new variety for farmers to become comfortable. And those are the really sort of progressive, innovative farmers, if I could use that word. So, and seed, if we are talking about really low capital farmers with very little liquidity, $10, $20, $15 is not a trivial amount of money. So that's number one. So there's that. So farmers still consider unknown new varieties, such as the ones we were using here, although superior, but still unknown, as risky. And so if you want to scale up even new seed varieties quickly, you need something that removes that risk perception, either as an instrument or some kind of education, promotion, demonstration. Now, when it comes to NRM, fertilizer, manuring, liming, long-term investments in soil health, the situation is even worse because of the long gestation periods. We were not considering that. We were considering the immediate within season investments, sort of variable costs around seed and fertilizer here. I think it would be really great to look at how do you make farmers, convince farmers to be more forthcoming in terms of those long-term investments. And I think that's something you and I and the colleagues in the room really need to concentrate our minds on. Thank you. I'm not sure I answered the question, but I did take some airtime in response to your question, Tilahu.
Thank you, Peswal. So we are officially kind of at the end of time, but I see that there are quite a few more questions out there. I'm hoping that maybe we can follow up. The presenters, we have 2 here. Unfortunately, Peswal and Melis are virtual, so it'll be a little bit harder, but I'm sure we can share the information so that you can follow up with them after. But Wani and Kelvin are happy to stay and talk and answer some questions. So are we going into break? Right into the next session. Okay, all right, so yeah, just find us. Okay, find us in the break after this next session. If you have follow-up questions, come find me, and I'm happy to put you in touch with the right person or with the right resource. And thank you very much for listening.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yeah, so here it is. So this should be it.
That also works. I was gonna ask to like move these chairs a little bit, but yeah, perhaps. That's about, you have to bring it a little more sharp. Okay, so can we invite the next set of speakers to come up front, please? Lorraine was in here a second ago. Oh, there we go. Yeah, we have, yeah, Mohammed, can you hear us? Just double checking your sound as well?
Yes, yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
All right, awesome.
Perfect. You can hear me, right?
Yeah, so we have the slides set up as well, and I'll be clicking for you. So you just let me know when you're ready to move to the next one. But we're not onto you yet, so thanks.
Sounds great.
All right, we're missing a couple of people, but we'll get started in a minute or two. Thank you. Yeah, that's the version. So we're missing Bessie. Does anyone know where she is? Otherwise, we can get started with presentations beforehand, and we'll get started with the Q&A. Yeah. Cool. All right. So good morning, afternoon, good night to, depending on where you're connecting from. Good afternoon, I think, here in the room. Thank you for being here with us today. Welcome everyone again. So this is the People and Household Track, Shock Responsive Social Protection. I'm Alejandro Valencia. I'm the Senior Knowledge Management and Organizational Learning Advisor for the Resilience and Food Security Bureau at USAID. And we're ready to get started. We're really happy to have all of you here. This session will be mainly on how government and other stakeholders are generating and using evidence and the role of shock responsive social protection and associated financing mechanisms to inform that decision making. So we have a nice mixture of private, public sector contributors today. We have here, is this still on? Okay. Dr. Stephen Debro from the Institute of Development Studies. We had Bessie Mzuza, and Paul is connected, Paul Chipeta is connected as well for the government of Zambia today. We have Mohammed Al-Menfi from the World Bank connected online. Thanks for being here. We have Lorraine Nyue, who's here with us. Thanks for being here. And again, reminder to all the presenters, we're gonna have about 10 minutes per presentation. I'm gonna be that bad guy that's going to keep the time, so make sure you stay in time, because at the end, we're gonna have a Q&A session of about 20 minutes, and we wanna get some of those questions in. So start thinking of what you wanna ask, because we're gonna be passing those mics on. All right, with that, we'll get us started. Dr. Stephen? Go ahead. And then the clicker works? Yeah. Okay, can we get to the presentations?
Thanks very much, and greetings, everybody. Let's see if this works. Okay, just give it a moment. There we go. So I'm going to be talking about shock responsive social protection for resilience, a big topic for 10 minutes, but we'll see what we do, how we go. So social protection has got two main pillars, and then there are others that people add, but the two main ones, foundational, are, oh dear, the formatting's gone weird. Social assistance and social insurance, okay? So social assistance is basically transfers to people, usually cash or food or vouchers. And social assistance is a way of building household or individual assets, right? So using the livelihoods framework, sustainable livelihoods framework, we have 5 types of capitals that get improved through various types of transfers. For example, school feeding, which keeps kids in school, builds their human capital, nutrition, education. And similarly, or conversely, so what happens in this diagram is that your getting access to social assistance increases your stock of assets, and that's a way of building resilience all by itself. The second mechanism is social insurance, and social insurance protects you against shocks. So again, using the same 5 capitals, you can see that, for example, in the previous session, we had a discussion about index-based livestock insurance. That protects natural capital. If you don't have insurance against shocks, your capitals have a risk of shrinking back towards the middle of the diagram. In other words, you lose everything, you become destitute. So resilience can be achieved either by increasing household assets through social assistance, and of course other mechanisms, and then can be protected against losses or shocks through social insurance. Okay. What's important also is the systems which are delivering social protection. So a system is more than just a program, right? A cash transfer or a school feeding program or a public works program is just a project. But a system which delivers transfers predictably on time to everybody who needs it with dignity, etc. That's what you need to build resilience. So what I'm saying in this diagram is that systems include programs which need to be adequate, delivery of transfers need to be adequate and have good coverage of all who need it. Policies need to be in place, policies and legislation need to be in place, but also the delivery systems need to be in place. The registration, the payments, the beneficiary management or information systems need to be there as well. And that's important for shock response. So you need to look at these questions. Does the support provided through social protection reach everyone who needs it? Is it enough? Is it guaranteed, or is it ad hoc? If the answer to any of those questions is no, then I argue that social protection will not build household resilience. It'll keep you alive, but it won't build your resilience. Let's take a case study, which is Bangladesh, COVID-19. I'm waiting. We're all waiting. Okay, we went too far. Sorry, can we go back? We're going back. So we did some work, that's fine. We did some work in Bangladesh and we looked at informal workers in urban areas, and we found that pavement dwellers and slum dwellers. And we found that when the government imposed all these standard lockdown measures, which happened all across the world, of course, this had the immediate effect of cutting off people's source of income, employment, and livelihoods. And those who suffered worse were those who didn't manage to work at home, like most of us did, with salaries that continued during lockdowns. They were people that were uninsured, they had no access to social insurance, they couldn't carry on working and get the salary, so they were, in effect, put on unemployment. They were made unemployed. And because the government had done this to them, the government also had to provide some kind of social protection to keep them alive. Otherwise, people would literally be sitting at home and starving. No income, no food, no social protection. Can we please go to the next slide? This gets added to my time, by the way. I hope you're counting. Way too far. Okay, you can leave it there, that's fine, that's fine. So we did a survey in Bangladesh and we found that in Dhaka and Chattogram, and we found that the number of days that people working obviously crashed from a full month's work, 22, 25 days a month of work, down to very close to 0 during lockdowns. And we found that average income also, of course, crashed. So among these people that were informal workers mostly, crashed to pretty much 0, especially for women who weren't willing to break down lockdown regulations. Some men did, and they made a little bit of income, but essentially everybody's income crashed very close to 0. Okay, and people said, I can't buy enough food for my family. And of course, in the early months, they got no help from government. Later on, that changed, but it came a bit late. So the governments responded across the world in many different ways. And some of these ways are what we call shock responsive social protection. The first mechanism is to increase the payments to existing program beneficiaries. So you have a program where people are getting pensions or child support grant or some kind of informal social insurance, and you simply pay them a bit more while they have to sit at home unable to work. And that keeps them going because they get enough to survive on. Horizontal shock response is where you increase the number of beneficiaries on the program. And that was also done in many countries. And that depends very much on your ability to quickly register and pay people who are coming into these systems, who aren't on the system initially, but during lockdowns, they were added to the system. And so those two mechanisms were very important as a way of expanding coverage and adequacy of payments to people that needed to survive lockdowns. Now, did these programs reach everybody who needed it? No, they were important, but they didn't reach everybody. What was it enough? No, it wasn't enough. It was usually inadequate. Again, kept people alive, but not much more than that. Was it guaranteed? No, it was ad hoc. It was a government reaction to a crisis. There was no way that people had a right to claim these benefits. They were lucky if they got them. So I'm making a slightly controversial point here, which is that I think shock responsive social protection is great, and many countries are now investing in building their shock responsiveness of their social protection systems as a result of learning from COVID, but it's not enough on its own. It will support survival, not resilience. The important learning is actually to build the systems. Having those systems in place, the architecture for registering and for paying people is probably more important than the actual programs themselves. Once you have that architecture in place, you have flex capacity, you can easily scale up, and you can also make it a little bit more claims-based or rights-based. So I want to make a separate argument here, which is a point about people's right to claim social protection. If you see social protection as a right, then shock response should be automatic. When you need help, you should be able to claim it. And if you think about unemployment insurance or pensions that we are paying to pension funds, social security funds, that's also in fact rights-based or claims-based. We have a right to claim what we have put into. Poor people don't have that right. So when you have social assistance, you're lucky if you get it. And the social protection floor idea is about making that a guarantee. Everybody should have a right to an adequate level of, let's say, survival or subsistence income. So my basic argument here is that shock responsive social protection plus a guaranteed income floor equals resilience. And to have that, you need to have a system and an architecture in place, which has been built in many countries as a result of COVID, so we're getting there. But the right to social protection is still not there in most countries. So let me close by conceptualizing this idea of resilience requiring both people to be resilient and systems to be resilient. So let's start out pre-interventions. You have, like pre-COVID, for example, in many countries, you had people with low assets, no access to social protection, weak social services, weak food systems. You can strengthen individual resilience, as I showed in those spider diagrams, by providing social assistance, which increases household and individual assets, and by putting in place social insurance, which is a safety net against shocks, protects your assets against losses, okay? That strengthens individual resilience, but within the framework of systems which are able to deliver that social assistance and social insurance. So you need to also strengthen systems in parallel, okay? Social protection systems need to be well functioning and comprehensive. Food systems also need to be integrated, robust and equitable, and probably also other systems like disaster risk reduction, risk management needs to be effective. And if you do that, if you strengthen individual resilience and strengthen systems, you will end up with this desirable outcome, which is high resilience. People that are protected against shocks, they have adequate assets, they are able to access social assistance and insurance when they need it. When shocks happen, they can access social services, and food systems are robust and equitable. Okay. That's my theory. This is very conceptual. We're going to have some more practical, empirical people coming with evidence. But before I end, or as I end, I just want to mention a new publication, which is this book, which just happens to have come out recently, called Resilience and Food Security in a Food Systems Context. There are flyers here if you want to get the book. And by the way, it's open access, so it's free at the point of delivery, like social protection should be. Okay, thanks very much.
So, Bessie? Thank you. it should be Mohammed. Okay, I'm sorry.
Oh, okay.
Apologies, everyone. So Mohammed is actually you. Can we go back 2 clicks?
Can you hear me?
Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
All right, awesome. Yeah, you're ready to go.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Yes, thank you, everyone. I would like to, Dr. Stephen gave us a good framework on understanding social protection theories and pathways to support citizens to resilience. I would like to give you a snapshot on what happened during COVID and the current crisis in terms of social protection responses. So can you move to the next slide, please? So here we see a number of social protection measures since the beginning of COVID, March 2020. And we believe this is the largest scale up in the history of social protection globally, with almost 4,000 measures have been announced, either new or adaptation to existing programs in more than 200 economies, countries, and territories since the beginning of pandemic. And the type of measures spans from social assistance, social insurance, and also labor market policies, focusing on the supply side, meaning kind of supporting beneficiaries through training and job research assistance. But also from crisis to another, we see also a spike and an increase in the response to the price shock currently initiated primarily from the current war in Ukraine, and we see more than 1,000 program or measures been announced, either new or existing. The structure of the response between the two different crises is important to distinguish, and which is something I will highlight more in the upcoming slides. Next, please. So again, it's a historic scale up in a way that the number of people reached. And during COVID, we have more than 1 billion people have been supported, received transfers during the pandemic, the 2 year. This is an accumulative, and it's assuming that one beneficiary receiving at least one benefit during the 2 years. During the price shock, we believe almost a billion people have received any type of support, social protection support, either through cash transfer, social insurance, labor market, but also subsidy, which was a key feature of the current crisis. Can we move to the next, please? Now, looking at the coverage of COVID pandemic in terms of social protection, and we have here 3 graphs that shows us the coverage in terms of absolute number, coverage in terms of share population, and coverage across the income group. And on the left one, we see the top 10 programs in terms of coverage and absolute number. And we see India, where there's a program that paid 200 million women through their their bank accounts directly for 3 months and supporting them into during the pandemic. We have also the United States stimulus check, which got on to more than 150 million people. We have also Japan, which is almost a universal social cash transfer, one-off cash transfer, Pakistan as well, and we have China. And we can see here, these are the kind of big countries in terms of population, and this is why kind of they take up most of the absolute coverage. Moving to the coverage as share of population, we see a different picture here, where there are multiple countries that they announce one-off universal basic income supporting, and we counted more than 10 that we counted that they reach out to all adult citizens within the country. And Timor-Leste, South Korea, Jersey, Taiwan, and we have Israel, almost universal as well, Japan. And the reason why, like all of these are kind of universal, but the reason why they're not 100% is because of the actual, and not everyone kind of apply for some of the cases. However, when we look at the coverage across the income group, we see an alarming and a call for action, actually, where the lowest in terms of coverage per region is the low income countries, whereas the highest is kind of high income countries. And this kind of disparity in coverage it's a call of actions and how we can address and close this gap in terms of coverage among different income groups. Next, please. Here, this graph just shows one of the, Dr. Stephen talked about systems and programs, and what we noticed here that during COVID, that a vast majority of programs were a new one, whereas there are quite a number of building and adapting existing ones, but the vast majority were new programs, new systems, targeting either new people or targeting existing people, but with the existing social protection beneficiary, but with the different systems. And that is kind of also kind of an idea where building systems are COVID and has initiated a lot of system building, which I will mention a couple of country examples that such as Togo and DRC, where they built system for the first time in terms of social protection during pandemic. So pandemic was kind of an impetus for system building for many, many countries. Next, please. Despite the large coverage, more than 1 billion people supported during COVID, the duration was not enough. And here we see an average duration of 4.5 months in terms of cash transfer support, whereas the pandemic lasted more than 2 years, and an average stringency where lockdowns is more than 6 months in globally. And that is kind of shows that despite the coverage was large, the duration was short. And this is, I think, an inherent trade-off within social protection sector, where how to balance between coverage and adequacy and duration, given the constraint, fiscal constraints and limited resources. However, what we noticed also that there was a lot of new programs were mentioned at the beginning, but then extension. So the 4.5 months is the initial duration announced during pandemic. But what we see also, we saw a large wave of extensions of the programs that were announced at the beginning of an average, a larger average of 6.2 months on average, but the sample size is smaller. So countries, most of countries, what they did is they announced program at the beginning, and then they kept, because of the uncertainty with the pandemic, they kept extending this program. Actually, for some countries, more than one time, the extension was announced. Next, please. Looking now at the timeliness of the response, and here what we did is that we calculated the number of days between the announcement of the program and the first payment that were made per program. And we see a large variation among different regions, ranging from 14 days in South Asia to 40 days in Sub-Saharan Africa, with an average of 26 days. But deconstructing this and delving deeper into the type of expansion, whether it's through vertical or horizontal within the existing program, we see vertical expansion is faster. And what do we mean by vertical expansion? By you have an existing beneficiaries and you increase the benefit level, or you top up or rate up the benefit level for the existing ones. And this is usually, it's an easier task because you already have the beneficiary, they are identified, they're receiving the benefit. You just increase the generosity of the benefit. Whereas for horizontal expansion, meaning kind of you need to add the caseload, add more people into a program, and we see that taking a larger, like a slower response rate because of the complications and like how do you identify who's eligible, who's not eligible, and the complications of all of that. So we see building vertical expansion was faster and more timely in most of the cases we looked at. Next, please. And spending here, I'd like to go quickly, but we see an average spending of 2% of GDP in 187 economies across the globe. And that is 0.5% more than the pre-pandemic situation. And we have Aspire data indicating 1.5% average global average on spending on social protection programs. However, when we compare this with the response to the Great Recession comparing to the same we see during the Great Recession, or we have less than $1 trillion, 653 actually million when spent during the Great Recession social protection response, whereas during the pandemic we're talking about the $3 trillion, but with the caveat that most of that is from high income countries, not from low income countries. Next, please. Now, select a couple of country insights that I would like to highlight. We're not going to go in details. I'm happy to take them in the Q&A, but just to give you an overview. Next, please. So we see 3 or like almost 6 extensions happening during COVID, and if we can group them, there are increasing more people, such as South Africa, our 350 program, where they added more informal sector workers into the program and expanded the program horizontally. We see countries that increased the expansion to more places, such as informal settlements in DRC, and the Kinshasa program that relied on mobile, on satellite imagery and mobile phone to reach out to the informal settlement. We see also programs connecting with other sectors, such as what happened in Morocco, where the support was to the health, the non-contributory health insurance scheme. They were supported and they were identified as supported during COVID. More data has been used, and then Togo, the Nfusi program that has been a big bank in Africa, and how Nfusi, Togo, and within 10 days managed to deliver a benefit, despite that no system existed before that. And then we see also expansion in digital, and how particularly in public works, where new innovation in digital public works relying on hiring people to do some digital work and give them cash. So it's kind of cash for work, but digital one. And then we see also increase of approaches of financing, and we'll have Lauren later talking more about this, but like kind of what the risk financing layering that was adapted in Sierra Leone after the Ebola and the flooding crisis that happened in the past 10 years. Next, please. Now moving on a few, like one important study on evidence, and also kind of what we draw from the COVID response. So next, please. Definitely the response to COVID, and here this is a nice paper on the kind of understanding the impact of poverty, response on poverty across many countries and across income groups. And we see here the orange dot, where if in the scenario where there is no mitigation, and where would be the poverty line, and the blue one is that the poverty line after the percentage change in poverty line after announcing the mitigation or providing social protection response. And the vertical line is the 0. And despite that, not all countries reach out to the 0, where like they manage to offset all the challenges or the impact on poverty. But definitely without social protection, situation could have been worse in many countries. And as we see here in the blue line going to the left, and that's kind of taken from impact evaluation studies and across multiple countries, and shows the kind of yes, it was useful. It did not offset completely, but the situation without it would have been in a worse situation. Next, please.
Mohammed, we're going to ask you to wrap up.
Absolutely. Can we move next, please? I want to conclude at this time. Thank you. Another one, please. Next. Yes, is it déjà vu here? Just quickly, I wanted to highlight that what we noticed now during COVID was more cash social assistance focus response. During a price shock, we see the rise of subsidies, and we see the rise of subsidies across the region, except for North America, but across the region, we see subsidies been the largest share of the response, and that's something we did not see during COVID. So that's kind of also an alarming thing. Next, please. Next, and then final takeaways. The pandemic response in a nutshell. This is historic. This is the largest in history, and I think a lot of lessons can be learned, and a lot of the systems that we build on. However, it was uneven in terms of coverage, and as we showed, but also humbling, and kind of trying to make us think more about what is universal social protection, how do we get there, how do we support countries in reaching that goal. Final slide, next please. And finally, some of the challenges that loom ahead. We need to increase coverage, and how can we do that, and how can we deal with the subsidy resurgence? And also we need also to think about the adaptiveness and how we incorporate more automatic stabilizers so we can mobilize funds, systems in case of crisis hits, humanitarian linkages, and how can we link what the humanitarian systems are doing to strengthen national programs, and thinking of fiscal sustainability. And that's big topic that we all should think about. And finally, we need to make sure that we benchmark simplicity and designing our programs to make sure that they're responsive, but also efficient. With that, thank you so much, and I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you very much for that presentation. To move things along, we're gonna invite Bessie over from the government of Zambia. Please go ahead.
Actually, it's Malawi, not Zambia. I don't know. Okay, so yeah, so I'm going to talk about generating and using evidence on the role of shock responsive social protection based on Malawi experience. So that's the background. You might be aware that we are about 20 million, and the 85% of the 20 million lives in the rural, but 50.7% of Malawians are poor, and 20.5% they are ultra poor who needs social assistance. But looking at the frequency of the shocks, in 2019, we had Cyclone Idai, 2021, 22, Cyclone Anna, and Cyclone Gombe, just recently, Cyclone Freddy. So what we've been doing in terms of generating evidence and also contribution to building resilience, we are talking about these social protection instruments. Our professor has already talked about them. We have the prevention part of it, the protection part of it, promotion part of it. Those are the tools for social protection. So we are talking about prevention, increasing the absorptive capacity during shocks. So that's what we are doing in Malawi. In terms of protection, we are building anticipatory capacity to reduce the impact of the climate variability. When it comes, how do we reduce it? That's what we are doing. But we are also building adaptive capacity in the long term through sustainable livelihoods promotion. So, sorry, yeah, okay. So what evidence exists in Malawi? So there are so many studies. We've been implementing the social cash transfer program and the public works program for several years. The social cash transfer started in 2006, but based on evidence, we have scaled it to all the 28 districts. In 2006, we only started with one district, and then we have scaled it up to all the 28 districts. So we have the impact evaluation in terms of the cash transfers, what they are doing in terms of building resilience. So we also have, we had a project with the Food and Agriculture Organization. It was called Protection to Production. It provided evidence in terms of the multiplier effect of the social cash transfer program. So based on this evidence, we've been targeting the beneficiaries in terms of looking at the poverty levels. So the social cash transfer program is targeting 10% of the ultra poor without labor, and then the next 15% is being targeted by the Climate Smart Public Works program, but based on evidence. But based on evidence, along the implementation line, we have seen that maybe poverty targeting is not doing us any justice, because we have a lot of inclusion and exclusion errors. So we want to move out of the only poverty targeting, but putting an additional layer in terms of the targeting. So we want to move from the poverty targeting to categorical targeting, but of course, using the poverty as a benchmark. That's the social cash transfer program. Based on evidence, it has, we have seen that the regularity and predictability of that program is giving resilience to all the participants of that program. It's smoothening consumption. As you know, that's the Maslow hierarchy of needs. You have to deal with the needs of the people first. So it's food first. If somebody is hungry, that one, a hungry man is an angry man. You cannot talk of anything to build resilience if you can't address the food needs. So the social cash transfer program builds resilience in terms of the consumption support. So in terms of the stabilizing the financial security, we are talking about, because they are organized in savings and loans groups, so we are encouraging them into savings. So building that financial asset, it's about financial inclusion. But in terms of the enrollment of school children, we are trying to build human capital. So we have a school bonus attached to the cash transfer program. So every school going child, primarily it's about $1, and secondary it's about $2. So we're trying to build human capital so that maybe they can find good jobs when they are educated. And in terms of coping mechanism, the beneficiaries avoid the negative coping mechanism when a shock hits. In terms of the ad hoc support, we are talking about the vertical expansion and the horizontal expansion. Professor has already talked about it. When a shock comes, we add on the transfer values because they are not adequate at the moment. And we also, because we know that when a shock comes, most people are hit, not only those on the social assistance. So we are talking about the vertical and the horizontal expansion in terms of the social cash transfer program. In terms of the public works program, we have moved away from the usual infrastructure type of public works program. Now we have adopted a climate smart enhanced public works program, looking at the catchment management, because we want to deal with the causes of food insecurity in Malawi. So we want to looking at the soil and water conservation structures, and then reducing the soil loss, so that at the end of the day, we reduce the food insecurity in Malawi. We build in the soil conservation structures. We have the water table high. Women will not travel long distances because water will be found nearby, and the soil and the waters are nearby. You can do irrigation and so on and so forth. So we are dealing with the food security in terms of the public works program. So those are the structures. You can see that's a stone band trying to reclaim a gully over there so that we reduce the runoff, and then we have more water down the communities so that they can also catch in terms of the ponds. And the social cash transfer beneficiaries and the public works program beneficiaries, we give them additional interventions. We mobilize them into savings and loans groups, where we now concentrate on the financial literacy programs, giving them seed capital, giving them mobilize them in terms of the assets. So that's what we do, because the transfers, we realize that the transfers which we give them are not enough. And if you want to build resilience, these are the other interventions: the nutrition interventions, the financial interventions, everything in terms of now linking them to the social sectors as well. So those are the other interventions which we give to our beneficiaries of social cash transfer and public works program beneficiaries. In terms of the anticipatory building resilience, we have aligned the humanitarian and disaster response with the existing social protection programs. through the mechanism which we have placed in place. So in Malawi, over the years, we have seen that between November and January, we call it the lean season, because most of the households are short of food insecurity. So year in, year out, that's the slow onset of the shocks. We give them additional support to these beneficiaries. So what we have done under the World Bank program, we have incorporated a SEC, the SEC component. Okay. So what we do is, upon the president declaring a disaster, we can now activate the SEC, rearranging. It's a zero component, but after a shock, we can always reprogram the resources and respond to that shock. But we have also recently procured a risk financing insurance with the ARC capacity. We have also built a scalable mechanism under the social cash transfer program, looking at the drought. So this one is a scalable mechanism, and even the insurance itself is linked to drought. So we want to build resilience, anticipatory resilience when a shock comes. So when a drought is triggered, because we have triggers which we have developed with our colleagues from Department of Climate Change. So when it's triggered, the social cash transfer program is expanded vertically and horizontally. So in terms of building the systems, the professor has also talked about those. We cannot respond quickly if the systems are not in place. So we have the Unified Beneficiary Registry. It's not a beneficiary as the name sounds, it's a social registry. It's just a database of all the names and social characteristics of all the communities in Malawi. So each and every program which comes takes their beneficiaries from this social registry. So for social cash transfer, it's about 10%, and then the public works, the 15%. But we have also invested in the payment systems. We saw during the COVID-19 response, because most of the districts were paying manual, and with those restricted movements, we could not pay our beneficiaries. So we have invested more in terms of the electronic payments. So most of the districts now are under electronic payments. It's flexible even in the challenging environment. And in terms of the coordination, the humanitarian cluster and the social protection cluster, we are almost working together, because we have realized that we are looking at the same beneficiaries, the same communities in the same geographical space. When it comes year in, year round, we're talking about social protection. But when it comes to the disasters, whether natural or man-made, we're talking about the humanitarian response. But they are the same beneficiaries, because we are saying the poor are the most hit when a disaster comes. So we are working together with the humanitarian sector. So we have a pillar working group, and we are also, the social protection is also part of the protection and the social support in terms of the humanitarian country team. So thank you so much. That's the evidence from Malawi.
And lastly, Lorraine.
Thank you, Bessie. It's interesting that I come after her, because we've literally just finalized the Malawi parametric insurance product. So I'm briefly going to talk about disaster risk financing. We're going to talk about how risk clearing works, and then we're going to go into how our parametric product works, and hopefully I do all of that in 10 minutes. So wish me luck. If I skip something, please do come find me. I'm going to try and run it over quickly. So I'm going to just go briefly about who the Africa Risk Capacity is, because we are the largest providers of parametric insurance. We are a AU specialized agency, and we are organized into a catastrophe risk pool. And when we say a risk pool, we mean that every year we invite different countries to join the pool. So we don't have a static set of clients. There are only 3 risk pools in the world, 4 risk pools in the world. There's one from Southeast Asia that has flood. There's one for Caribbean, and there's one for for the Pacific. I just thought I should bring that there are only 4 risk pools in the world. So it's quite a unique offering. So far, we've been able to pay 167 million to over 20 countries that we've been working with in Africa. We've received about 156 million premium. That just goes to show that we are paying out more than we are receiving. So we do have a lot of donor support. So we fall largely into the public and developmental part of this parametric offering. Just more on what we do specifically and how we provide this risk insurance. The first thing we do is we do a client risk assessment where we assess the risk. We do it through various mechanisms that we already have in place. We do have a model that we use called Africa Risk View that is specific for drought. We have employed other agencies to come and support our climate risk assessment for tropical cyclone and also for flood. We also do have an outbreaks and epidemic. This was not the final version of the slide, but we also do have an outbreak and epidemic product that covers 4 different viruses. There's Marburg, there's Ebola, there's Lassa fever, and one more. We also do disaster risk financing. I will talk about the products, instruments that we have under this. We also support contingency planning, premium financing solutions, and this is very important because countries and governments have very large competing priorities when it comes to paying out premiums. So we do facilitate conversations between countries and donors to provide premium financing so that they're able to take out insurance. And then we also do capacity building programs. So I'm just gonna go directly into disaster risk financing. And basically at ARC, we're trying to look at it from a risk layering perspective. And what we're trying to say from this risk layering perspective is that the current disaster risk is very large for one instrument to cover all the risks. So what we're trying to do, we're trying to assimilate and optimize which are the risks that a country can take, which are the risks that can be shared, and which are the risks that can be transferred. Because we do know that once you take out insurance, transferring all of your risks to an insurance will lead to a very large premium. And if all the money is going into premium, it means that you don't have anything to sort of hold the risk that will retain, because we do know that with insurance, you still will retain a certain portion of the risk. So we are trying to look at it in these 3 different ways. We're trying to encourage governments to determine what are the budgetary instruments, what are the things that they can do with the risk that is left to them, what are the contingency funding instruments that they can look into so that they can be able to provide liquidity, how can they set this money aside, and what are the instruments that they can transfer for a premium in exchange for risk transfer in insurance. So we're trying to layer it that way so that we can provide maximum coverage for the risk, and also we can bring in more instruments, and this makes it cost effective for the whole chain. So when we look at how we are risk layering at ARC, our primary tool is a parametric insurance product, which I will talk about, and we offer this for drought, flood, tropical cyclone, and also for outbreaks and epidemic. And below that, because we do know that insurance it won't cover all the risks. So there's always an attachment point, which is the starting point at where the insurance policy will start to pay out. So below the attachment point, there's always that risk that remains with the government. So now we're trying to organize it in such a way that the government can have a contingency fund that will pay out if the risk does not hit the attachment layer. So that's what we're calling the ARC contingency fund. And above that, over and above the parametric product, we're trying to provide for very, very large catastrophic risks in form of a CAT bond. So this will also function similarly to how the risk transfer works, but it will be for extremely severe risks. So I'm going to go into detail now just about the ARC parametric product, because this is where 90% of our business, our revenues are coming from, and this is the main tool that we provide to governments. So we do start with the rainfall data set, because drought, we want to see by how much or by how little there's deficiency in the moisture and in the atmosphere, and we organize this deficiency into what we call an index, and the index will be based on various factors such as the precipitation, temperature, such as the crop, such as the season. So you organize that into an index, and this index is what we'll use to trigger either the drought, or determine that there's no drought if the trigger is not reached. And then we try and identify the populations that will be most vulnerably affected. And this will just be based on historical data. Which are the countries, which are the counties that have had the largest vulnerability profile? Who are the people who are going to be most affected by drought? And we try to focus any vulnerability or any hazard functions around this population. Using these two information, the index, the deficiency, the population affected, we do try to determine an average cost for the drought. How much would it cost to restore resilience? I do not want to overuse that word. How much would it cost to support someone during that period where there's a drought? And then using that average cost per person, we multiply this by all the vulnerable population, and we do have a model response cost. That is how we determine the cost of drought. That's how we determine how much we base the insurance. Using this cost of insurance, we can now help the government delve into the risk transfer layers. What part of the risk will you try to retain? What part of the risk do you want to transfer out? And what part of the risk is above you that we feel like we can go to the capital markets and provide a cat bond for? And post triggering, if there is a drought, we help them also do a contingency fund planning in advance, where they can now plan the implementation. Who will they target? How will they do it? Will it be cash transfer? Will they be providing for food? Will they be going out and maybe doing farmer schemes, literacy, and all these mechanisms will fall into the contingency planning. So that's how we really run our parametric tool, parametric insurance product, and it's similar for tropical cyclone, it's similar for flood, and it's similar to how we run the outbreak and epidemics tool. So I'm also just going to talk about the contingency fund. Like we said, it covers perils below, and this is just a contribution-based mechanism where we encourage countries to set aside money in advance so that it can provide for liquidity once there's a drought event. And then we are also now piloting a cat bond where we're going to provide for extremely high severity events, which we've started to see in the first couple of years. We're piloting with one of our clients, so I don't think I can talk about it more, but basically what we're trying to do is we're trying to see by how much can we reduce the cost of insurance by cutting that cost in half and passing it on to the capital markets. So thank you so much, and I'll be around if you have any questions.
All right, thank you very much. So that concludes the presentations. We know we're a little bit over time, but we did start over time, so we're gonna give it about 10 more minutes for questions coming from you guys. We have people here helping us with the microphones, so just raise your hand if you wanna ask a question. And we have the microphones over here too. Oh, and I would like to also ask Paul to come up here to respond to questions. Yes, in back.
Hi, I have a comment and a question for Bessie. It's really incredible to see the very comprehensive approach that the government of Malawi has taken to, to social protection. And I'm just curious if you could share a little bit with us on how you built interest and if you had any key champions across certain ministries within the government of Malawi.
Yeah, did I hear you right? Key champions in terms of
what are some of the key, or who are some of the key champions within the government of Malawi and really bringing this approach to life?
Yeah, so in Malawi, I belong to the Poverty and the Social Protection Division. It's under the Ministry of Finance and Economic Affairs. Our role is mainly to coordinate all actors in terms of social protection. So we don't implement, but we give policy guidance, we develop the strategies, we mobilize resources, but there are sectors which implement these instruments. So for the social cash transfer program is implemented by Ministry of Gender and Social Welfare. For the public works is implemented by our colleagues under National Local Government Finance Committee in coordination with the local government ministry. In terms of the cash plus interventions, UNICEF is supporting us. World Food Program is also supporting us, but we also have a sister organization under the National Local Government Finance Committee, which is a COMSIP, Community Savings, and I've forgotten the other part, but they do mainly the cash plus interventions. So because there is a coordinating ministry, the coordinating department, that's the motivation. And also because, as I said, 21.5% are ultra-poor. And year in, year out, the slow onset of the shocks, what we're talking about, the lean season, every year in, year out. And for your information, like last year, we had 3.8 million households which needed assistance. And then if we don't build resilience to these people, it means year in, year out, we'll be supporting them with these interventions. But what we want to do is to build resilience so that we minimize this year in, year out in terms of support. Thank you.
Do you have any other questions from around the room?
Yeah, just following up on this. You mentioned that you work under the Minister of Finance, but also the other ministry fund social protection in times of crisis. But I think, I mean, my question remains in the sense that so we need to build resilience from the ground up at I think at the household level, because we need to empower them to be self-sufficient in case of shocks. While I think social protection, the ingredients of social protection is that somebody else intervenes, right? In this case, the Minister of Public Finance or UNICEF or WFP or Minister of Public Works. But how can we do without it? Especially because in the light of the fact that you just mentioned that 3.8 million households haven't received anything during the latest shock.
So as my colleague Bess indicated, at the national level, we have the Social Protection Working Group, which comprises of all sorts of partners. These include, for example, the Ministry of Agriculture, the Department of Management Affairs, Climate Change, Ministry of Gender, and then there's also like our office, the National Local Government Finance Committee, as main financiers that receive resources from the World Bank. But this is at the national level. Within this same kind of setup, we have the social registry, which is being managed by the Ministry of Finance and Economic Affairs. But the systems are being handled at local council levels. So all the implementation takes place at the local level, where we have the district councils that are directly responsible for social provision to its constituents. So at any one time at the center, we just provide a policy guideline and the programs within which the transfers would be made. So it's the district commissioners that do the proper coordination of ensuring that the resources reach the intended beneficiaries through the instruments that we've provided at the center. That's how it works. And from the district, we also have lower level structures at what we call village level and community level. And within the district, we have the technical arm, which is the district social support committee that manages all aspects related to social protection. And the same kind of mirror goes for the humanitarian sector interventions. Thank you.
Just to add, remember I mentioned about the Unified Beneficiary Registry. So that's the social registry. When we capture data, socioeconomic characteristics of all the households, we use a proxy means testing now to rank the beneficiaries into their rightful categories. So the 10% based on the vulnerability of that household in that starting from the local level, starting from the village level to the group village level to the TA level, and then to the district level. All the households are ranked based on their vulnerability using the proxy means testing. So as I said, because over the years, during the implementation of these programs, we have seen that now the communities have gotten used to our questions, the questionnaire, and they position themselves now to become vulnerable. So we want to use an additional layer of categorical targeting. The poverty first, and then categorical targeting. We want to target now the elderly. So put a benchmark, whether 50 or 60, you are eligible for a social cash transfer program, child-headed households, those households with the chronic vulnerability. And then because now be targeting the actual vulnerabilities, will now be looking at integrated social safety net, giving the safety nets in terms of their vulnerability. We cannot give a household which has got labor but has got no capacity to produce to give them the subsidies. Can we give them cash transfers? Enough cash transfers, adequate cash transfers, regular cash transfers, so that we build resilience.
I think we have a question here in the middle.
This, I'll direct this at Mohammed, but it's actually something maybe each of you could respond to, and that's, there's going to be a pushback here on the cost of all of this. It's extraordinarily costly to provide social protection, but implicit in what each of you are saying is it's actually extraordinarily costly not to do it. So to what extent have you been able to get traction on the notion that the value of what you're averting by making these investments outweighs the value of the actual cost of social protection? And what have been some of the strategies and evidence you've used to make that argument? Thank you.
Start off with Mohammed.
Thank you so much. This is actually a great question. And I think one of the arguments and evidence on the cost of social protection is that the multiplier effect. There are a lot of studies now, especially in Africa, where researchers are kind of trying to estimate for every dollar is given in cash transfer, how much is a return in economic activities in the local markets, and how does that affect in kind of more of kind of the microeconomy aspect of the communities where cash transfer is given. And I think this is a new evidence has been shared, well, and ranging between for every dollar in a subset in a set of African countries, ranging between 1.25 to up to $2 in return in the economy due to the economic activities and that and thinking about it in this way. Another element which also justifies a lot of the cost is the integration. We talked about vertical and horizontal expansion, but there's also the comprehensiveness they mentioned, where you're not just giving cash, but also you're trying to give linkages to labor market and kind of increase. And that touches also to the previous question on like, how can we increase the resilience of households? And the idea of cash plus and how a lot of evidence are emerging now on how cash plus is very effective and more effective in a lot of senses in terms of reducing the costs in the long term, but also increasing the household's resilience in terms of confronting these shocks without the need of consistent need from states and intervention. So I would say there's evidence of multiplier effect and also on cash plus elements that also justify some of these costs as well. Over to the other speakers.
Thanks, and I'll say, yeah, Lorraine, please, like about.
Is it working? So I can give you more specific evidence. So the FCDO, which is the UK government, which supports ARC, has recently concluded a study just to answer this very question. So Mohammed is very right to say it's for every $1, it's $2 of benefit. So that has been replicated over and over again. ARC Limited is 10 years old, and at the beginning of the study, they did find it was 11 shillings. So it's kept reducing just because of two things: delays in offering the cash transfers or delays in implementation. Because the longer it takes for you to provide the cash transfer or the mechanism or the protection, the worse it gets for the individuals, the vulnerable population. So time factor is what is causing it to reduce. Otherwise, the benefit is around 11 shillings. So if we could improve our mechanisms within Africa so that within minutes within a drought occurring or a drought being recorded, at ACK Limited, we pay out within 5 days, but implementation takes a couple of days. If we're able to drill down that window, it could go up to 11 shillings. And then I just also wanted to make a comment. I think I forgot the comment I wanted to make, but it will come to me. I'll find you. Thank you for the question.
Stephen, do you have something to add very quickly? We have about one minute, sorry.
Yeah. In addition to the multiplier effect, which I think is a really important, powerful argument, especially for cash transfers, this investment in early action and preemptive measures has been shown to demonstrate to benefit in terms of saving $3 per every dollar on humanitarian intervention post-shock. So there's definitely a saving there. I think was also what Lorraine was saying. One point I wanted to make again is that it's difficult to put a monetary value on a humanitarian cost, right? So during COVID-19, governments mobilized enormous amounts of money. In South Africa, we spent 500 billion rand, which was 10% of GDP, on on social protection responses. And that means that when you need the money, you can find it, right? So the argument that social protection is unaffordable just doesn't hold water. And in fact, the massive response during COVID-19 has also prompted and stimulated the campaign for basic income support, which will be much more expensive than what we have at the moment, but less expensive than what happened during COVID. So I think the campaign is moving towards universal social protection.
I have remembered my comment. Thank you. So actually, every time we have the conversation, is social protection or is parametric more insurance, the answer is usually Haiti. When you look at how much humanitarians have spent on Haiti and how much they would have spent if it was just on an insurance product, it's not comparable. They've spent billions and billions of dollars and the country is still nowhere near recovery. So if all that money had gone to early warning, anticipatory action, preventive care, post-recovery disaster relief, you'd have spent way less than they have spent right now. Thank you for indulging me.
All right, awesome. I think with that, we're gonna have to close it. Just know that these people will be walking around among us. We have a coffee session now. Thank you for staying here, the extra 10 minutes. Now it's been reduced to 20 for your coffee. I wanted to thank again, Stephen, Bessie and Paul, Mohammed and Lorraine for their presentations. Maybe a big round of applause for them. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
My people, are you ready to rise? To be free, to wise, to be free. Now you ready to rise? To be free, to wise, to be free. Now you ready to rise? To be free, to wise, to be free. Now you ready to rise? To be free, to wise, to be free. I did bring some news and I did bring some tidings of the Lord. I did bring some news and I did bring some tidings of the Lord. guide the food. Let the black light shine on society and expose the truth. Let the black light shine. Make it expose of the evil hiding in the darkness. Let the black light shine into our hearts and into our soul. Let the black light shine on we path. Let it guide the food. Yeah. Let the black light shine from society and expose the truth. Yeah. Let the black light shine. Make it expose of the evil hiding in the darkness. Let the black light shine into our hearts and into our soul. Cause we need to look at black women. Cause we need to look at black women. I say we need to look at black women. Ooh, we need to look at black women. Black people. Look at black women. Black people just look at black women. Just embrace the reflection. Black people just look at black women. Think about we protection. Black people just look at black women. And make we energize. Look at black women. And make we organize. Look at black women. Black people. Black time, put the black laws in our black mind. Black people just. Black time, put the black laws in our black mind. Black people just. Black time, put the black laws in our black mind. Black people just. Black time, put the black laws in our black mind. Black people just. Black time, put the black laws in our black mind. Black thoughts of progress. Black time, put the black laws in our black mind. Si melo, yo la chaque monte. Si melo, la peine pas vaut. Si melo, yo la chaque monte. Si melo, la peine pas vaut. Si melo, 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 si melo.
Oh, baby, shake your chumba. Shake her. Hey, baby. Hey, baby. Baby, oh, baby. Hey, baby. Baby, oh, baby. Baby, shake your chumba. Hey, baby. Hey, baby. Hey, baby. Baby, oh, baby. Hey, baby. Baby, oh, baby. Baby, shake your chumba. Too. Shake it to girlfriend. Yeke, sweet too. Yeke, sweet too. For my bikini, sweet too. Yeke, sweet too. For my bikini, sweet too. Yeke, sweet too. I'm a girlfriend. Yeke, sweet too. Yeke, sweet too. Yeke, sweet too. Yeke, sweet too. For my bikini, sweet too.
j'ai perdu mon chemin. J'ai oublié le jour et l'heure et le temps qu'il fera demain. Je viendrai vous parler d'un monde qui disparut en un instant. Les siècles qui passaient comme les secondes, oh, comme on enfile un diamant. Donnez-moi, donnez-moi. Donnez-moi, donnez-moi un peu d'eau froide, juste un peu d'eau froide, un peu d'eau froide. Donnez-moi un peu d'eau froide plutôt qu'une baignoire remplie de lait, pour me délasser des effets d'un voyage encapsulé. Pas besoin de luxe inutile pour apprécier la vue d'ici. Si vous saviez le ridicule d'un empire dans l'incendie. Donnez-moi, donnez-moi. ces contrées stériles, je les laisserai, se demandant qui était cette fille qui ne fit que passer. Ils se lasseront de même, ou bien la terre les avalera. Ils récolteront ce qu'ils sèment. Moi et mon eau froide ne seront plus là. Donnez-moi, donnez-moi. Donnez-moi, donnez-moi. Donnez-moi, donnez-moi. Donnez-moi, donnez-moi. Un peu d'eau froide. Juste un peu d'eau froide. Un peu d'eau froide, yeah. Juste un peu d'eau froide. Juste un peu d'eau froide.
Welcome back, welcome back. I can't believe how fast time flies when you're having fun. So welcome to our last plenary session. Hopefully you've been having loads of conversations today. Hopefully you've been meeting loads of people, and hopefully you're leaving today, or you're starting to kind of think about today about like all the questions and all the insights are coming up for you. But we also know that a lot of the times we don't have enough time for sense making. We don't have enough time to digest what we've just heard. Like All the presentations I know had so much richness to them, so many insights, so many studies, so much evidence that was presented, new methods. So we've really started taking stock of what do we mean by the cutting edge when we talk about resilience evidence. So what we're going to do now is just take a deep breath and just try and figure out what does this all mean and start to do a bit of sense making. So, and also maybe just to kind of capture your attention as well in terms of what comes after this, we've got a roaring party set up straight after. So you bear with us for the sense making, and we've got an amazing welcome reception with a wonderful, wonderful set of performers. So there is a reward at the end of this, I promise. So now, just inviting you, and there's post-it notes on your table, there's also notepads, just to take a moment and just reflect individually, what is the one insight that you're taking away from today? What one thing struck you today? And we'll give you a few minutes. And if you already have your insight, you might need another moment, but if you already have your insight, please turn to someone you're sitting next to and share that insight. What is the one takeaway from today's conversations? But we can also be quiet for a bit longer.
Roaring.
Service announcement comic that we will pick up from the Gates table in the community stack.
La calle que está prendida mientras duermo sin poder soñar. Día tras día, despierta, ella sigue su vía. Always the same, that's not my way. Pa'lante sin saber qué hacer. Día tras día, despierto, te darán por vencida. Always the same, that's not my way. Pa'lante, ya sabes que sí. Mira cómo fluye, sigue el ritmo del tiempo. Acércate a la gente, grita tu mejor canción. En la calle, somos parte de ese grito escandaloso, somos mágicos. Olele, olá, olele, olela, olele, olela. Olele, olá, olele, olela, olele, olela. Si le pides que te espere no vas a poder. Hay cosas grandes, cosas que no podrás detener. Hoy sonríe sin pensar, ya no puedes ignorar. La calle que está prendida sigue ritmo, baila sin cesar.
So you guys are already doing this, but the next step is discuss with your whole table. So from your pairs, share those insights from that conversation, whole table discussion. I think people are.
Quítame la mano, ¿de dónde la tienes? Ya te dije, nene, que eso no es así. Quítame la mano, ¿de dónde la tienes? Ya te dije, nene, que eso no es así. Una mami rica, bella, tropical. Una noche
quítame ya, no lo digo más. Chucu, 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 quítame la mano. ¿De dónde la tienes? Ya te dije, nene, que eso no es así. Quítame la mano. ¿De dónde la tienes? Ya te dije, nene, que eso no es así. Si ella quiere con un nene ya se va, pero a veces sola quiere parrandear. Si ella dice nada que nada, toca ya arrepentirá. Quítame la mano, ¿de dónde la tienes? Que eso ahí no viene bien. Ponle más abajo, vete pa'l carajo con tu mano también. Si te va a agarrar, sabe cómo hacer. Mire que no hay nada que te envíe. Y si no sabe, pues llame a su madre pa' ver si le enseña cómo es que es. Mira cómo mueve la cadera. Todas las mujeres de Colombia y Venezuela, la dominicana, la puertorriqueña. Ay, cómo se mueve esa garota brasilera. Mira cómo mueve la cadera. Todas las mujeres de Colombia y Venezuela, la dominicana, la puertorriqueña. Ay, cómo se mueve esa garota brasilera. Si ella dice nada que nada, toca ya arrepentirá.
And now, hopefully, you're starting to see like what might be the theme that's emerging at this table. Are we all a bit confused about X? Or are we all getting really excited about Z? Keep the table conversations going, but we also want to see one submission per table via Mentimeter. So we'll just need one of you from each table to submit one theme that is coming from your conversation via this Menti code. So keep the conversations going, decide on a theme, and submit it via this code. And meanwhile, may I have our keynote listeners joining me on the stage?
Mira, mais la vie ni mauvais, cyclone vient annoncer, soleil la vie ni voilé, montagne la vie briévé, rivière la cachaillée, tous osios qu'a caché, nous là nous qu'a cherché, on côté pour nous aller. Mettez-vous bien, mettez-vous bien, mettez-vous bien, c'est là où trouver l'amour. Mettez-vous bien. Mettez-vous bien, c'est là où trouver l'amour. Depuis longtemps nous aimons, mais l'esprit a malmené. C'est pour ça aujourd'hui nous ne pouvons pas retrouver nous. C'est comme ça la vie là est, toujours pour exister. Si t'es à la Guadeloupe, oui c'est là nous trouver l'amour. Mettez-vous bien, mettez-vous bien, mettez-vous bien, c'est là nous trouver l'amour. Mettez-vous bien, mettez-vous bien, mettez-vous bien, c'est là nous trouver l'amour. C'est là nous trouver l'amour. Mettez-vous bien. C'est là nous trouver l'amour.
Okay, thank you all. Really interesting to see the results that are coming in. So I think we've got about 11 tables who have fed back. Oh, maybe it's time for that trick again. Let's see, how tired are we? Getting there. Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for this, for submitting these answers. I think it's really interesting. I was having a look, and what seems to come through is this theme of, may we have silence, please? Thank you. So what seems to come through is this theme around widening the perspectives. And what we wanted to do, so we've invited here one of the track co-leads from each of the tracks from this afternoon's conversations. And we're going to hear a report back of what some of these conversations that have been contributing to widening these perspectives around resilience, around measurement, around evidence. So we will be diving deeper into what were the key themes and the key insights that have been coming from these tracks. I will leave it to the track co-leads to introduce themselves, and then we'll hear back perhaps 3 to 4 minutes report back, and hopefully giving everyone who's not been in your parallel session a flavor of the richness of the discussions that took place. Shall we start with Dubale? Do you want to introduce yourself and give us a report back?
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm Dubale Admasu from USAID Ethiopia. I'm the resilience advisor for the mission activities. So I will be representing the people household track, and we focused on 2 areas: financial inclusion and social protection. So on the first side, where the first session, we explored, the latest evidence on critical roles of financial inclusion and transformation as a source of resilience for households across context, as well as, the role of formal and informal institutions. To maybe, share few observations from several presentations. Almost we had 8 presentations summarizing and taking, the key takeaway as part of, the participant. It is very challenging task we are given, but I will share, very few key takeaways from those this presentation, as well as question and answer from the participants. One thing is, in terms of being affected by different shocks, it is the informal sector, particularly on the finance side, is highly affected, and also is not getting the social protection. And for that one, in one of the presentations, it was said, it will be good because they are not addressed by the formal sector, how we can get, the cost-effective saving schemes for the informal sector so that, they can also get access to finance. In the case of presented from Rwanda, the EJO scheme was a very good exemplary. But what is also came from that presentation is the political commitment, as well as the engagement of the private sector, is very critical in terms of building trust, keeping the model as well very simple, and also having proper communication. And the other one, in terms of still improving access to finance, is the case study presented from Kenya, was very critical, where for the informal sector, particularly working on the supply side as well as the demand side, in terms of the demand side, providing technical support through technologies, social inclusion, and like Sharia compliant products provision, and from the supply side as well as availing semi-commercial funds like the USAID revolving fund provided, which were able to leverage huge amount of financial resource for the informal sector, as well as building on the Gramini model, where groups, although they are not addressed, assisted from the formal sector, how they can build their own collateral so that they can access, which showed huge access to finance. The other one, very interesting, was how we can improve insurance financial access to the unreached communities, particularly women-headed household, and even within the households, also for women and youth. In that case, having a family unit insurance rather than asset-based insurance came very critical and exemplary, where women in those rural settings, they don't have access to land, ownership to land, and big assets to livestock. So having that family unit insurance was very interesting, and that can also improve access to finance. The other one was blending different technologies, and that was the case presented from CIMMYT, which was very interesting, how the drought-tolerant maize was merged, blended with the index-based insurance that unlocks the potential of improving access for these services from the households. And then those households were not participating in the blended services, both drought-tolerant crop as well as the insurance scheme, bounced back 43% of their initial food security level, while those blended households that participated in the blended service were able to have 82% increase from the original, which I've been discussing in the morning, how resilience, not bouncing back, but even to the better food security. And then these blended technologies, finance, as well as insurance scheme, was very critical. Maybe just going to the second part of the social protection, we learned social protection is not only social building social assistance, but as well here as well, social insurance was also very critical. Shock responsive social protection, and the case of COVID was very exemplary. And although it was not predictable as it was supposed to be, but countries were able to renew their commitments and continue. That helped to have better social insurance. And the case of the case presented from Malawi as well was having a regulatory as well as predictable insurance and payouts, and also cash transfer was very important. And not only that one, but having comprehensive programming, complementary livelihood, cash assistance, plus livelihood diversification options were very important in terms of building resilience capacities, all at the 3 level, and anticipatory actions and program level financing, risk financing were also mentioned in that. And the interesting thing is where the government, local governments take the lead and champions those changes, as the case of Malawi, was very critical in terms of reaching scale. And one ministry mandated to lead those coordination for resilience building and cash transfer. And the other one is also avoiding duplication, where they built a system for digital payments and social registry, having a common agenda for the government as well as development partners was also very useful. Let me know when I'm left with 1 minute.
Oh,
Am I gone?
10 seconds.
Woo! Yeah, I think a lot, to take as a resilience person, a lot of, maybe let me jump to the final one, if that is the case. And the other one was on the risk buying, where advising with appropriate technical support for the government, where they can buy the risk, and which one they can retain, which can they share, as well as which risks can they transfer in terms of, and then with associated contingency planning, risk transfer parameters, modeling drought response, and also engaging the wider community was very important in terms of not only response, but as well building resilience capacities. A lot
Thank
to
you,
take,
Dubale.
but I struggle to summarize.
I think that will be true for all of the tracks. I don't envy any of our keynote listeners. They're performing an amazing role tonight. And I really want to just cherish and celebrate this role, because a lot of the times we have keynote speakers, but actually we have keynote listeners. So these amazing individuals have been quietly listening in to all the sessions and are here to give us the key insights and themes. Shall we go to the second track? I'm going to keep in the order of the scales that we have that also works with the sources of resilience framework. So if I can go to you, Charles, what came out in the communities track?
Thank you very much, and thank you for the team and presenters under the community track. Most of the cases which were shared were focusing on the indigenous knowledge, and especially linked to the scientific knowledge. Something which emerged is the tension between the indigenous knowledge and the scientific knowledge. Of course, there was one of the key players who raised the question, why is it that when the indigenous knowledge is attempted to be linked to the scientific knowledge, there is the value of the indigenous knowledge? So there's need to valorize the indigenous knowledge. Secondly is, how do we co-create especially common data bases or common data platforms for the indigenous knowledge and the scientific knowledge? Because it's emerging that like scientific data or meteorological data, they are operating in silo, while the indigenous knowledge, which has been shared by communities over thousands of years, is not getting that space in the linkage space. So the investments that needs to be done is to have that common platform and really add value to that. The second, the second point is on transitioning this indigenous knowledge to the policy space. What was not discussed at length is the linkage, especially with the policymakers at the national level. There was a lot of investment, which was actually the target of the track, is to provide the cases around bottom-up knowledge generation and usage. But the question around, again, the high-level policy space, whereby they've got decisions, even if there is a devolved government systems like for Kenya, the national government still plays a significant role in decision making. If you look at the climate finance, the Ministry of Treasury still make that decision. So the next phase that needs to be focused on is, how do we also transition this hybrid indigenous knowledge and scientific knowledge to that high-level policy space, like to inform discussions around global structure among the heads of states in Africa or the African group of negotiators, because the submissions are made by the national governments. And then the fourth point is, there were discussions around experiences around application of methods and approaches. And what I like, we had from India, the citizen science, and then of course we had the arts and games. And I like one of the youth from South Africa, I don't know if you can stand up, introduced the indigenous games. The community track, the team who are presenting on there was a youth representative from, I think he's from South Africa. I don't know who has ever heard of indigenous games, and it really brought out very strongly among the Khoi community that indigenous games now is kind of catalyzing the interaction of the young people and the children to really create that level playing ground and also interactive space so that they can really bring out the knowledge they have as young people, but also interact with the indigenous knowledge and the scientific knowledge. So that is one of the key lessons that I picked from the indigenous games, which I pick as a lesson. But of course, the discussion again around the investments, where are the platforms, common platforms for all these, especially from Sub-Saharan Africa? Where do we converge in the indigenous knowledge and the scientific knowledge? And I was sharing with our group, for instance, we were from Bonn, and the question was, African governments or governments are submitting their positions with regard to global stocktake. But the question I was asking each of the participants, which we were on the table, who has ever interacted with a reporting framework from subnational government or national government in your country? Can you raise your hand? Who has ever seen a reporting framework for adaptation? One. And I will share with you a very concrete case, right? For instance, Kenya. I asked the director for climate change in Kenya, and the subnational government, the directors who are representing the climate change community in their governments. And the question they raise is, the frameworks which are being shared is treating like Sub-Saharan Africa or even a subnational government as it is so homogeneous. But when you go inside, you find the wetland, you find the arid, semi-arid, islands. I come from islands. If you plant 1 hectare of maize per unit, you might get 30 sacks. But if you plant in semi-arid, there are more needs, like more water, and then again, you might get low yield. How do you use that as an adaptation metric to measure the resilience also in the, as an outcome? And that one raises the question that one of the colleagues here raised, we need to redefine resilience, but also from my side, also another which I've had, is redefining metrics. Are we focusing on metrics for input, for output, for outcome and impact? So we are still even not focusing on the impact. So how do we invest in resilience that will create impact by really building resilience of the people? And I'll recommend you to read the paper, the adaptation metric report by the Global Commission on Adaptation, because I realized there is also a skill gap or knowledge gap around which metrics are we focusing on, even though the definition of adaptation and resilience is still a question and is a context specific. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Charles. And thank you to all our keynote listeners. Kara, shall we go to the urban systems track?
Can you hear me? Yeah. Charles, how can I possibly follow up after you? I'll do my best. So I'm representing the urban track, and as a reminder, our focus is on informality, climate adaptation, and also conflict, rights, and displacement. Cities are complex risk environments, and to engage in urban resilience programming, projects, or processes, you really must have a systemic understanding of how risks affect urban areas. We talked about how it's important to understand and address a multi-hazard environment, look at the interconnected nature of challenges facing cities, including the complex cascading risks that they're facing, and also think about things like risk transfer, in these densely populated areas. And so a couple examples that came out around thinking about these interconnected issues. One is, if you're working on land tenure and affordable housing, you need to also be thinking about water access. I mean, they're intrinsically linked. Addressing conflict should be done alongside hydromet, or looking at hydromet hazards. And also crime. I mean, crime is something that completely undermines our ability to deal with risk. And so, when you're engaging in urban resilience programming, it's not one sector and then another sector and another sector. You really need to be thinking across sectors and also looking at this complex risk environment. And urban resilience programming really lends itself to collaborative forms of urban governance. Someone said governance with communities, not for communities, which I think is a really good summation of thinking about how we think about working on resilience. And on that theme, there's also a theme around building the capacity of communities to collect data and meaningfully engage in solutions that affect them. We talked about building capacities and partnerships to build local solutions, and then localizing our understanding of risks, like climate risks. And an example was around community-led citizen science.
through something like citizen science, where local community members are able to present their lived experience of living with heat, for example, then they're able to share that directly with local officials or decision makers who are planning and implementing interventions that directly affect them. And so I think an emergent theme is really that data is power. A USAID colleague in Zimbabwe shared that there was an assumption in the mission that people living in urban areas were better off than those in rural areas. But then when they actually looked at the data, they found that 28% of people living in urban areas were food insecure, compared to about 25% of people in rural areas. So they had an assumption, but then when they looked at the data, they were able to have a different impression of what the problem really was. Another example is around informal settlements, particularly with internally displaced persons. They're living in very fragile states with protracted crises, and we simply don't have enough data. So it's important to work to fill that data gap, but that shouldn't be a constraint or a barrier to engagement. So it's like we need to fill the data gap while also thinking how we can engage now. There were two specific climate-related hazards that came up as increasingly important. One was heat, particularly affects people in low-income areas and informal settlements. It's a slow onset risk, so it's often underemphasized, but the heat intensity in particular affects people in informal settlements at a much greater scale. And we need not only to address heat, but also come up with the metrics to measure it. Another example of a slow onset, high intensity climate impact is urban flooding. And so those were two kind of heat and flooding areas that are like maybe from our group's perspective, really important and increasingly important, but not emphasized as much in urban resilience programming. And so a couple entry points we talked about: how can data be translated into action? I'm calling it data fatigue. There was this conversation around how people in informal settlements are always getting like knocks on their doors, people collecting data, and it's really important that we, or those who are engaging in research, can describe the value added of the research that they're going to be conducting, and how it will add value to the conversation, including how it can add value to data that's being collected at various scales, from the local all the way up to national and other scales. And that data collection can really be a transformative tool. And then the other thing I have to mention as an urban planner myself is that we did talk a little bit about urban planning and design as an entry point. The urban form really shapes things like heat intensity. Areas with less vegetation are hotter. They also correlate with lower incomes and non-white communities that will often have poor quality construction. So I think I'll stop there. And it was a really rich discussion, and I couldn't possibly summarize everything, but I implore you to join us tomorrow. You can learn more.
Thank you, Cara. Tasvia, shall we go over to you? And I know you also have a slide, so if we can move back to the slide with the visual harvest that you guys have created.
Thank you.
Did you hear that, Tasvia?
All thanks for Sonia there. She has done all this amazing work, so yeah. I'm Tasvia. I will be reporting back from the Social Ecological Systems track, which you're calling ACS track. And thanks to Albert, Nadia, all our presenters, and our graphic harvester for pulling out all of these amazing messages together. So I'll be very brief. So I think in the very beginning, Nadia has mentioned about that in the social ecological systems track, we'll be focusing on the interactions between people/community and nature/ecosystem. So as this is a bit of broad discussion, so I've started with the framing or understanding of these issues of resilience, where Nate has very clearly talked about the attribution of resilience. If I being very brief, those attributions, there are 5 attributions he mentioned about, which are diversity, redundancy, connectivity, inclusivity and equity, and adaptive learning. But having said that, there are trade-offs in understanding and, for example, what sort of connectivity is needed to keep the system resilience, and there comes the point for this capacity where we have where Nate has put a very good point of like capacity can be seen from persist, adapt, and transform lens. So in the persist means where we don't want systems to collapse, but there we now go for adaptation. So we want the system to help them adapt to with the change, but now the lens are going towards more on transformation, which is kind of a novel approach. And in this transformation, the key message that came out in is the innovation is the real hope, where we can, for example, challenge the existing system and build and break the resilience concept. So from there we had so it's the overall resilience framing, but then we had, because I told that it's on the people and then nature, so we had a presentation conversation from Gina, who talked about adaptation governance from community perspective. So from her presentation, we had focused on this systems approach to responding through different shocks and changes. And as this resilience is a very complex to understand, we need to see this from systems point of view, and allowing, which can give us more room for learning. Even if, because we talk about resilience, it's kind of in process. Even if we cannot become resilient, kind of we need to learn from safe to fail resilience approach. So this is one learning that came out in that discussion. And then finally, we had a presentation on nature-based solutions, where there are the final message that came out in is that holistic social ecological systems framework is needed for NBS resilience, but there are gaps in evidence, or the evidence is kind of scattered. So more research, like consolidated research, is needed there. But having said all of this, the issues of time frame and scale are still of questions, and like long-term ecological health gain versus short-term. So like how to work on that. So we ended our notes on there, and then we moved forward to the how session. So in the how, we had two fantastic speakers who started, Nadine and Shiona. So they have talked about climate change adaptation framing, where they have focused on adaptive capacity, livelihood assets, and equity cycle. But they mentioned about not focusing only on the generic adaptive capacity, but also on the specific adaptive capacity when we think about solutions for communities and people. And thus transformation need to be more need to focus on more pragmatic approach to help people to change their mindset. I think that was being also discussed in the opening plenary when we talk about like people shifting their mindset. And then we had another presentation which focusing on the global south perspectives of framing vulnerability. But I think we need to the message was that we need to pay close attention to what is making people vulnerable to climate change impacts, so that we can consider the social dimension of NBS, and they should not just for equity but for success, like how we can invest in nature-based solutions to have more impacts, more positive impacts and outcomes. And lastly, we have focused on this story, art, visual. So we have the colleague from Creative, Clara, who shared on the importance of creative-based participatory engagement and research, which can allow the community or youth to engage in the resilience process. Having said all of this, I'll just end with a note that I just attended right before I came in here, that when we are talking about all of this resilience approach, we are making this horizon a bit more like a widening. But I think we need to, because we are all from different tracks. There are many cross-cutting themes. So all the evidence or all the evidence are there in the sporadic manner or in a scattered manner. So need to bring all of these in a collective format. So that is kind of a challenge. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Tassia. 1,000 points to those who can create the ultimate wayfinding navigation system for resilience evidence. But we're humans, so we're trying. Before we go to Gerald, could we go to the slide that has all the speakers? I know that some of you have been asking. Perfect, thank you. Over to you, Gerald.
Yeah, thanks, Corina. And I think we had quite a very interesting conversation at the market systems and value chains resilience. I mean, looking into that, I think the discussion kind of drifted from different angles. Keep in mind that we had a private sector in the room, but also we have donor and looking at the private sector. So there's a key issues that were mostly covered in that conversation. I'm going to touch on a few of them. The market systems and the players within the market, creating a strong resilience supply chains actually depends on how well functioning market system is. And we've got quite a number of examples which were given out actually providing and some proving that strengthening the market system actually can actually enhance resilience on the market system. Particularly, we got an example from the guy from Economic, I think Michael, looking into how the market system, for instance, on the vanilla and the supply from Madagascar, how the smallholder farmers became resilient even in the last 3 years, where we've seen some difficult situations from the COVID one and also to the war in Ukraine. There was resilience among the supply chain from the smallholder farmers, but again, if you look on the international sort of logistics supply chains, it's kind of broke down. And this was informed by the investment, but also work that has done to the smallholder farmers, empowering them actually to be resilient, more resilient, and continue to produce even during those difficult moments. Another point was about the value addition, how enabling value addition on the market system through those players actually strengthen the market system. So looking into how much is being retained by the smallholder farmers supplying to the market system, looking into the issues like the middlemen, the examples how the supply chains go from the smallholder farmers, the first middleman, the second middleman, until the product reaches to the final destination. So cutting all that in terms of empowering smallholder farmers into their cooperatives for them to be able to actually adequately advocate for the value of what they produce has actually retained more value of actually what they produce and what they supply to the market onto themselves. Also, I think this was termed, and I did like that, it's an enduring supply chain play. We actually have heard this from this morning, enduring supply chains, and actually saying that we don't look this as a CSR anymore. This has to change. It has to be embedded into the business strategy, taking into account that the value of the smallholder farmers actually are integral part in the market system, and them being resilient is actually enabling the markets also to be resilient. We had also another point, I think this was the FAO, and we got a bit of a data which actually tells the importance of the resilient market system as the source of the resilience to the household and communities. So for the last 7 years, the number of people in need of humanitarian aid has actually more than doubled to 258 million people. And actually, this is mostly due to the not well functioning marketing system that has actually created the trouble in terms of getting things to the right places. And also, most of the people in fragile countries are in rural areas. So this depends more on the well-functioning marketing system for them to remain resilient more. They also issued around the adaptive capacity around the households, around the around the market players and how that kind of it's actually different between those different players in markets, and enhancing the adaptive capacity from both the smallholder farmers to other market players would enhance that. We also looked into the role of enabling environment at the market systems. This looked both from the political sides and the policy side and regulations, and how can that actually improve the well-functioning marketing system, which also is how can be the good source of the resilience to the local communities. We also looked into how resilience is actually different from different perspectives. I mean, people's stories of resilience are quite different, and looking into that perspective, treating the resilience from different communities, but also peoples, has to be looked into very different. We also looked into the role of the local private sector players, which mostly we found that are more resilient rather than the bigger private sector players, because, for instance, we looked into the agro dealers versus input suppliers, and how agro dealers are more resilient in the market system compared to input suppliers. First, because they are very close to their clients. I mean, they interact on a daily basis with smallholder farmers, know whether this seed supply is not working, or so forth. And the feedback mechanism between them and actually the people that they serve is quite very fast, compared to the hierarchy of the input suppliers and the other guys on top of that. Also, we had looked into the way that it is actually good to have integration between local markets and the international markets. And then looking in the past 3 years, we've seen how the international markets have responded to some of the shocks that have happened, both natural, you look into COVID-19, but also the war in Ukraine. I mean, so having a strong local market systems would ensure that people that actually depend mostly on the local market systems continue to be resilient, while these international market systems perhaps suffer mostly from these shocks, and takes time perhaps to actually to respond and adapt and actually come back to provide more the needs in terms of services. So there was quite a number of discussion, and I hope tomorrow is going to be more fun day in terms of discussion on the market resilience. So you're all welcome to join our track and more.
Thank you, Gerald. And before I let you go, and before we wrap this session up, I am curious whether there is one thing that surprised you, or one thing that you thought was missing from the conversations today. Putting you on the spot. Anything where you went, huh?
Reflection.
Anyone? Are we all just tired? It's the day one tiredness. Okay, well, we'll pick that up, and actually we start day 2 tomorrow with the fireside discussion with 5 other track co-leads that will be moderated by my colleague Suchi Vora. So hopefully with the night of digestion, we will start seeing like what are the themes that are coming up, and also what might be the implications for the conversations tomorrow, critical conversations on the who. So what are the needs and the trade-offs of evidence users, evidence producers? Thank you for today. We have a really important housekeeping announcement. In the communities session, there was an original cartoon that went missing. If anyone picked it up by mistake, could they please return it to Suchi? Suchi will wave. Thank you. It was the artist's only copy. So if it is somewhere lost, please find Suchi and let's help us reunite them. Thank you for today. More tomorrow, 9 a.m. sharp here. And now please join us in Hall C for a wonderful, wonderful evening reception. I'm very excited for this. So thank you for everything, and thank you for today.
Mieux attrape en nous, pour frappé tant nous, parce que t'es bête et jaloux, nous qui frappé tambour, pour yo pe vrai, yo sans doute, mi yo trappé tant nous, pour tomber pour nous, à bout, nous et frappé tambour, jouer pour être tout bout, mi yo trappé tant nous, parce que t'es bête et jaloux, nous qui frappé tambour, pour yo pe vrai, yo sans doute. Yo trappé tant nous, pour tomber pour nous, à bout, nous et frappé tambour, jouer pour être tout bout, mi yo trappé tant nous, parce que t'es bête et jaloux, nous qui frappé tambour, pour yo pe vrai, yo sans doute.
Mama told me before you go, set yourself free from your ego. Mama told me, don't hold back. Mama told me, no turning back. My mama told me, my mama told me, my mama told me. Mama told me before you fall for somebody, don't lose control, never hide who you are. Mama told me, no turning back. My mama told me, my mama told me, my mama told me. Pala de saúde, aqui de saúde, Pabli de saúde, Pala de saúde, 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 c'est saúde, saúde. Mama told me before you go, set yourself free from your ego. Mama told me, don't hold back. Mama told me, no turning back. My mama told me, my mama told me, my mama told me. Mama told me before you fall for somebody, don't lose control, never hide who you are. Mama told me, no turning back. My mama told me, my mama told me, my mama told me. Léopati pa gade derrière. Faut qu'on voit puis qu'on voit puis moun. Courir même sous café mourir. Courir.
courir. Même si on peut faire mon nuit, courir. C'est courir ou pas courir, courir.